Hello and welcome. This is Jub, and today we're going to play some World of Warships Legends. In this episode, I would like to have a look at the level 2 Japanese cruiser, the Tenryu. In my time playing the Tenryu, I found that it was a quite adequate ship, with high explosives of 2400 and armor-piercing shots of 27, with a firing range of 11 kilometers and a reload time of 5.9 seconds. It was able to inflict significant damage when the correct ammunition was used for the right target and range. The torpedoes were low damage and only moderately fast. Their range was relatively short, but good reach for that of a cruiser. And I found that they were able to be used as both a deterrent and a widespread, while being able to pick up hits on destroyers, or to send them in as long range, narrow angle towards a target like a battleship. Survivability was reasonable, and it felt stronger than I think that it was. But I think the main key to that is attaching yourself to an island and never letting go. You see, the artillery is only 4x1. However, they are mounted on 360-degree turrets, just like the torpedoes, so you are capable of bringing all weapons to bear on one side. The mobility was quick, turning circle reasonable, rudder shift time very fast. Its concealment is low, and due to its historic use, I used inspirations that would further that end. So on to captains. For captains, you have two main choices. Yamamoto for aggressive play, and I believe his strongest play is his AP, taken with Kunistov to offer your range, and Luchins to increase the damage. My preferred captain is Gunichi Mikawa. For inspiration, Jerzy Swirsky and Charles Madden. However, as always, if you do not have Jerzy, he can be easily replaced by Philip Vane. Overall, I found the Tenryu a good ship, though not overpowered. I enjoyed my time and played some great battles. The Tenryu exemplifies that of what the Japanese cruiser line becomes later on. So I will catch up on some footage of one of the more interesting games I managed to play. I'd like to talk about the history of the Tenryu. The Tenryu class has been the Imperial Japanese Navy's first light cruiser. If the 3 and 4 Piper cruisers of the Kuma, Nagara, and Sendai classes are better known, they constituted an evolution of 2 precursors built during the Great War. Indeed, the Tenryu and the Tatsuta were defined by the Admiralty in 1916, which wanted a kind of super destroyer, based on the British design of the Arethusa and the C-class cruisers, under the name Project 33. These ships were laid down in 1917, 2 months apart, flagships for the destroyer flotillas. Despite their small size, they had more horsepower per ton than the Chikuma, thanks to a combination of oil-fired boilers and Brown Curtis geared turbine engines. The 3 set of turbines gave the record 33 knots. However, on the armament side, even by the standards of the time, she was weakly armed, with only 4 main guns individually mounted on a bridge axis. However, these were the brand new 14cm, 3rd year type naval guns, also used on the icy battleships. The lack of anti-aircraft guns and secondary armament was not yet considered a weakness, Like the destroyers that she resembled and was to lead, the Tenryu was equipped for the first time with two triple Type 6 21-inch torpedo launchers, centerline mounted without reloads. And finally, the armour was the lightest yet for a cruiser, designed primarily to defend against the 102mm weapons used by the mass-built United States Navy destroyers. The Tenryu proved too late for the war that she was developed for, as her and her sister ship were launched in 1918, and by the time 1942 came around, they were considered too weak compared to the standards of the Imperial Japanese Navy cruisers, and they were considered second class. They were mostly engaged to perform as escorts. The Battle of Savo Island, also known as the First Battle of Savo Island, or in Japanese sources, the First Battle of the Solomon Seas. The battle took place on August 8th to the 9th, 1942, and was the first major naval engagement of the Guadalcanal campaign. The Imperial Japanese Navy were responding to Allied amphibious landings in the eastern Solomon Islands. They mobilized a task force of 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer under command of Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa. The task force sailed from Japanese bases in New Britain and New Ireland down New Georgia Sound, also known as the Slot, with the intention of interrupting the Allied landings by attacking the supporting amphibious fleet and its screening force. But only 5 cruisers and 7 destroyers were involved in the battle. In a night action, Mikawa thoroughly surprised and routed the Allied forces, sinking 1 Australian and 3 American cruisers while suffering only light damage in return. The battle has often been cited as the worst defeat in the history of the United States Navy. Mikawa's decision to withdraw under cover of night rather than attempt to destroy the Allied invasion transports was primarily founded on concerns over possible Allied carrier strikes against his fleet in daylight. In reality, the Allied carrier fleet, similarly fearing Japanese attack, had already withdrawn beyond operational range. This missed opportunity to cripple rather than interrupt the supplies of the Allied forces on Guadalcanal contributed to Japan's failure to recapture the island. Unprepared for the Allied operations at Guadalcanal, the initial Japanese response included airstrikes and an attempted reinforcement. Mikawa, commander of the newly formed Japanese 8th Fleet headquartered at Rabaul, loaded 592 naval troops on 2 transports and sent them towards Guadalcanal on August 7. However, when the Japanese learned that the Allied forces at Guadalcanal were stronger than originally reported, the transports were recalled. Mikawa assembled all of the available warships in the area to attack the Allied forces at Guadalcanal. At Rabaul were the heavy cruisers Chakal, Mikawa's flagship, the light cruisers Tenryu and Yabari, and destroyer Yungay. En route from Kavanning were 4 heavy cruisers, the Oaba, the Fuataka, the Kakao, and the Kinugasa. As Mikawa's ships attacked the Allied Southern forces, the captain of all 3 US Northern Force cruisers were asleep. Although crewmen on all 3 ships observed flares or gunfires from the battle south of Salvo, it took some time for the crews to go from condition 2 to full alert. At 0144, the Japanese cruisers began firing torpedoes at the Northern Force. 6 minutes later, they aimed their powerful searchlights at all 3 Northern cruisers and opened fire with their guns. While this was happening, the Oaba, the Furataka, and the Tenryu were stealthily moving through the inky black of night towards the target. As the searchlights came on from the Japanese column, the USS Quincy's captain gave the order to commence firing, but the gun crew were not ready. Within a few minutes, the Quincy was caught in a crossfire between the Oaba the Furataka, and the Tenryu. The Quincy was hit heavily and set afire. The Quincy's captain ordered the cruiser to charge towards the eastern Japanese column, but as she turned to do so, she was hit by 2 torpedoes from the aging Tenryu, causing severe damage. The Quincy managed to fire a few main gun salvos. At 0210, incoming shells killed or wounded almost all of Quincy's bridge crew, including the captain, and 6 minutes after that, the cruiser was further hit by a torpedo from the Owaba. The ship's remaining guns were silenced. Quincy's assistant gunnery officer, sent to the bridge to ask for instructions, reported on what he found. When I reached the bridge level, I found it a shambles of dead bodies with only 3 or 4 people still standing. In the pilot house itself, the only person standing was the signalman at the wheel, who was vainly endeavouring to check the ship's swing to starboard and bring her to port. On questioning him, I found out that the captain, who at the time was laying near the wheel, had instructed him to beach the ship, and he was trying to head for Savo Island, distant some 4 miles off the port quarter. I stepped to the port side of the pilot house and looked out to find the island, and noted that the ship was heeling rapidly to port, sinking by the bow. At that instant, the captain straightened up and fell back, apparently dead, without having uttered any sound other than a moan. At 0216, the Japanese column ceased fire on the Northern Allied forces. They moved out of range around the north side of Savo Island. The Ralph Talbot encountered the Furataka, the Tenryu, and the Yabari as they cleared Savo Island. The Japanese ships fixed the US destroyer with searchlights and hit her several times with gunfire, causing heavy damage, but the Ralph Talbot escaped into a nearby rain squall, and the Japanese ships left her behind. At 0216, Mikawa conferred with his staff about whether they should turn to continue the battle with the surviving Allied warships and try to sink the Allied transport in the 2 anchorages. Though several factors influenced his ultimate decision. His ships were scattered, and they would need time to regroup. His ships would need time to reload their torpedo tubes, which was a labour-intensive task and would take some time. Mikawa also did not know the number and the location of any of the remaining Allied warships, and his ships had expended much of their ammunition. More importantly, Mikawa had no air cover and believed that the US aircraft carriers were in the area. Mikawa was probably aware also that the Japanese Navy had no more heavy cruisers in production, and thus would be unable to replace any he might lose to air attack on the next day if he remained near Guadalcanal. Therefore, at 0220, Mikawa ordered his ships to retire. Well, thank you very much. If you enjoyed listening to the history of the Tenryu, hit that like button. If you've got anything to say, put it in the comments below. And if you'd like to be updated when I make my next video, hit that subscribe button, and I'll catch you next time.